You've seen the headlines. US strikes Iran. Iran fires back. Missiles over the Gulf. Drones raining down on oil ports. Breaking news notifications lighting up your phone at 2 a.m. And if you're like most people, you've been watching all of this thinking, okay, America has the biggest military in the world. Iran is outgunned. This should be over soon. And honestly, that's a completely reasonable thing to believe. The United States spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. It has aircraft carriers, stealth bombers, precision-guided missiles that can hit a target the size of a car from 30,000 feet. Iran, by comparison, is a country under crippling sanctions, with aging Soviet-era equipment and an economy that's been squeezed for decades. So yeah, on paper this looks like a mismatch. The bombs are falling. Trump is posting about it. The news anchors are calling it a decisive campaign. And most people watching from the outside are thinking it's only a matter of time. But here's the problem. What if I told you that multiple U.S. intelligence agencies, not commentators, not journalists, not opposition politicians, but the actual American intelligence apparatus, has concluded that Iran's regime is not at risk of collapse? What if I told you that President Trump himself has admitted, publicly, that the U.S. has run out of targets to bomb? What if I told you that Iran just got a brand new supreme leader, and instead of being the moderate that Gulf states were quietly hoping for, this man gave his very first speech with one message: no ceasefire, full revenge, and every U.S. military base in this region is now a legitimate target. This is not the war you're being told about. And today, I want to cut through all of it, the propaganda, the spin, the selective reporting, and show you exactly what is happening on the ground, who is winning, who is losing, and why the situation is far more dangerous for the entire world than anyone in the mainstream media is willing to say out loud. I've gone through the raw intelligence assessments. I've analyzed the battlefield data coming out of UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. I've broken down Iran's new supreme leader's first public statement word by word. And I've tracked what's happening to the world's most critical oil infrastructure in real time. Here's exactly how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to look at Iran's drone warfare strategy, because this is the weapon the U.S. military genuinely does not have a clean answer to. Cheap drones, fired in swarms of hundreds, targeting infrastructure worth billions. And I'm going to show you exactly how Iran used it to attack one of the world's most important oil hubs, one specifically designed to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Second, we're going to break down the new supreme leader's first speech, line by line, because what Mujtaba Khamenei said is not just alarming, it is a direct message to every Gulf state, every U.S. ally in the region, and to Donald Trump himself. And the reason he delivered it as a written statement, and not on video, tells you everything about how this war is actually being fought. And third, we're going to look at what American intelligence is actually saying versus what the president believes, because there is a dangerous gap between reality and the White House right now. And that gap has consequences for markets, for oil prices, and for whether this conflict stays in the Gulf or spreads somewhere much worse. By the end of this video, you are going to understand this conflict at a level that most professional analysts aren't publicly admitting to. You're going to understand why air power alone cannot win this war. You're going to understand why Iran is, in some ways, stronger today than it was before the first bomb dropped. And you are going to understand why the most dangerous moment in all of this might not be what has already happened, but what comes next. Let's get into it. Let's start with what actually happened. A few days ago, the United States struck Karg Island, Iran's most important piece of real estate, not because of its size, not because of its history, but because 90% of all Iranian oil exports flow through that single island. Think about that for a second. 90%. That is Iran's economic lifeline. That is the artery that keeps their entire government funded, and America hit it. Now, Trump's position was that they only targeted the military infrastructure on the island. The oil facilities themselves were left intact. Iran disagreed, violently, because within hours, Iran retaliated, and they didn't strike back at America directly. They did something smarter. They attacked Fujairah port in the UAE. Now, if you haven't heard of Fujairah, let me explain why this matters so much, because this is not just any port. Here's what makes Fujairah's location extraordinary. Look at the map. The Persian Gulf, where most of the region's oil trade happens, has one way in and one way out, the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran has been actively blockading that strait, making it a nightmare for Western shipping. So the UAE built a workaround. Abu Dhabi runs a direct oil pipeline straight across the country that connects its oil fields all the way to Fujairah on the other side. Ships don't need to go anywhere near the Strait of Hormuz. They dock at Fujairah, load up, and sail straight into the Arabian Sea. Clean, simple, safe. Fujairah isn't just a port. It is the world's third largest bunkering hub. It holds over 70 million barrels in storage. Ships from across the world refuel there. International oil traders store reserves there. It handles 1.5 million barrels of oil movement every single day. It is, in other words, the Gulf's best answer to Iranian aggression on the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran just bombed it. They sent in a drone swarm. UAE air defenses intercepted several, but several got through. The fires were visible from miles away. Iran had sent a message that was impossible impossible to misread. You bomb our oil infrastructure, we bomb yours. And we can reach things you thought were out of our range. But here's what I really want you to understand, because this is the part that should genuinely concern you. The drones Iran used cost between $2,000 and $100,000 each to produce. That's it. Iran manufactures them domestically at scale cheaply. Now compare that to what those drones can destroy. Oil storage facilities, refineries, desalination plants, pipeline networks, the kind of infrastructure that takes years to build and costs billions of dollars. A single successful drone strike on a major storage hub doesn't just destroy a building. It disrupts global oil supply chains, delays shipping contracts, spikes crude prices, and sends shockwaves through financial markets within hours. This is the fundamental problem with Iran's strategy that the US military does not have a clean answer to. Because here's how a drone swarm works. Iran doesn't send one drone. They don't send 5. They send 100, 200, all at once from multiple directions, flying at low altitude to avoid radar detection. Your air defense system can be the best in the world, and Iran knows that. So they don't try to beat it, they overwhelm it. If you shoot down 90 drones out of 100, you've done an incredible job. Textbook air defense. But those 10 drones that got through, they just destroyed a port that took 15 years and $20 billion to build. And Iran proved this wasn't theoretical. In the same period, UAE intercepted 6 ballistic missiles, 7 cruise missiles, and 39 drones in a single wave. Saudi Arabia had ballistic missiles fired toward Prince Sultan Air Base. Kuwait intercepted missiles and drones. Iraqi army headquarters in Mosul was hit by 2 drones. U.S. oil tankers in southern Iraq were targeted by remote-controlled speedboats, a tactic directly borrowed from Ukraine's naval drone playbook. This is not a one-off strike. This is a coordinated, multi-front pressure campaign across the entire Gulf simultaneously. And to make sure the world knew exactly what they were capable of, Iran released a video of what they called their hidden missile city, an underground facility packed with row upon row of drones, missiles, and launch systems, all ready to go. It was a deliberate psychological signal, a way of saying, we haven't even started yet. You cannot bomb a strategy, you can bomb a target. But Iran's drone program is dispersed, underground, mobile, and backed by domestic manufacturing. For every facility the US destroys, Iran has a backup, and a backup to the backup. That is what asymmetric warfare looks like in 2025. Cheap weapons, priceless targets, and no clean military solution. That's powerful on its own. But without understanding what's happening at the very top of Iran's leadership right now, you're only seeing half the picture. Because the man now in charge of all of this just gave his first speech. And what he said should send a chill down the spine of every Gulf state, every U.S. ally, and frankly, every person who fills up their car with petrol. Here's a question that the entire world has been asking for weeks now. Where is Iran's new supreme leader? Since Mujtaba Khamenei was named supreme leader following his father's death, there has been no video, no public appearance, no press conference, just silence while a war rages around him. And people started asking, is he injured? Is he hospitalized? Does he even have the support of the IRGC? Is the regime actually more fragile than it looks? And then, finally, he spoke, not on video, not in person, but as a written statement, read out loud by a news anchor on Iranian state television. Now, why no video? Think about it for a second. Israel and the United States have been running what military strategists call decapitation strikes. The entire point is to identify, locate, and eliminate the top of the command chain. Iran's previous leadership watched that playbook being used against them in real time. So the new supreme leader made a deliberate decision. If I appear on video, I give away metadata. I give away lighting clues, background clues, acoustic signatures. I give away my geolocation. And the moment I do that, I become a target. So the silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. But here is what matters far more than the format of the message. Here is what Mujtaba Khamenei actually said. Because Gulf states had been quietly hoping, praying, really, that this new leader would walk things back, that he'd be more pragmatic than his father, that maybe, just maybe, the IRGC aggression would soften, Hormuz would reopen, and some kind of negotiated off-ramp would appear. That hope died the moment this statement was read out. Let me break it down for you, because every single section of this speech is a signal. The first thing he talked about was national unity. He called on every Iranian to come together right now, in this moment. He specifically asked Iranians to participate in Quds Day, which is their annual anti-Israel rally. Now, why does that matter? Because in the days before this speech, U.S. and Israeli operations had been systematically targeting local governance institutions inside Iran, police, IRGC local command structures, administrative bodies. The goal was clear: collapse the governance structure from within, get people into the streets, trigger regime change from the ground up. Khamenei sensed that, and he addressed it head-on. Unite now. Don't let them divide you. This is the moment. That is not the language of a man preparing to negotiate. That is the language of a man preparing his people for a long war. The second section section was a direct tribute to the Iranian military. He praised the fighters. He said, and I want you to hear this clearly, Iran will never retreat. We will resist with full force. Now, when a supreme leader says that publicly during an active conflict, he is not just speaking to the enemy. He is speaking to his own generals. He is telling the IRGC, keep going. Escalate if you need to. I have your back. And that means heavier retaliation is coming, not winding down, intensifying. The third section, and this is the one the Gulf states were most desperate to hear something different about, was the Strait of Hormuz. Hormuz stays closed. He was explicit. He called it economic warfare. He framed it as a tool designed specifically to drive up global energy prices, put pressure on neutral powers like China and India to mediate, and ultimately turn the world against the United States. Because when oil prices spike, it is not Iran that gets blamed in the living rooms of Europe and Asia. It is the country that started the bombing campaign. The fourth section was an ultimatum to every Gulf state hosting American military bases: UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, all of them. He said it without ambiguity. Remove U.S. military presence from your soil, or you are a legitimate military target of Iran. Not a warning, an ultimatum. And then came the fifth and final section of the speech, and this is the one that hit differently. He named the Minab school. During the conflict, a strike hit the Taqwa school in Minab. 168 schoolgirls were killed, children. And Khamenei looked directly at that and he said, this was not an accident, this was deliberate, and we will never forget it. Every drop of blood will be answered. He called it a war crime. He said Iran would seek compensation, and if compensation was not given, Iran would destroy enemy assets to the exact same extent as the damage done to Iran. An eye for an eye, stated publicly by the supreme leader of Iran. And then, just to make sure nobody missed the message, he specifically thanked the Houthis in Yemen. He thanked Hezbollah in Lebanon. He thanked the armed groups in Iraq. He called them all brothers in the Islamic Revolution and told them to keep fighting harder, not easier. This is the part that destroys the entire logic of Trump's war objective, because the one thing Israel demanded as a condition of any deal, the one non-negotiable, was that Iran dismantle its axis of resistance, cut off Hezbollah, cut off the Houthis, pull back the proxy network that spans from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq. Khamenei didn't just refuse, he doubled down on it publicly in his very first speech as supreme leader. The axis of resistance is not going anywhere. Proxy warfare is the core of Iranian foreign policy, and it will remain so. So let me put this in plain English for you. Trump went into this conflict with one stated goal: regime change, a new Iran, a democratic Iran, an Iran that no longer threatens its neighbors or funds proxy armies across the Middle East. What he got instead was a new supreme leader who is younger, angrier, ideologically harder, and burning with personal revenge. A man who just told the entire world in his very first words of leadership, we are not stopping, we are not negotiating, and everyone who helped America bomb us is next. You came to end the regime. You made it stronger. That is the reality nobody wants to say out loud. But here's what makes all of this even more alarming. Because while Iran is escalating, doubling down, and launching drone swarms across the Gulf, America is quietly running into a wall. And the person in charge doesn't seem to know it yet. Here is something that Donald Trump said recently that barely made the headlines. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the U.S. has hit all the targets it can find. Read that again. The most powerful military force in the history of human civilization. A country that spends close to $1 trillion a year on defense. A country with satellites that can read a license plate from space. With stealth bombers that can penetrate any known air defense system. With intelligence networks spanning every continent on Earth. And they have run out of things to bomb. Let that land for a moment, because this is not a minor tactical update. This is a fundamental admission that the air campaign, the entire strategy, has reached its ceiling. And Iran is still standing. Now here is why that matters so much, and why Iran saw it coming from the very beginning. After years of watching the US and Israel run what are called decapitation strikes, targeted assassinations of top military and political leadership, Iran made a strategic decision. They built redundancy into every single layer of their command structure. Take out a general, his deputy has full authority and full protocols. Take out the deputy, there is a backup to the deputy. Every sensitive location has a decoy. Every leader has a survival protocol. Every facility has an underground alternative. The logic is simple. If you cannot beat American bombs, then never get detected in the first place. Make yourself impossible to find. And Iran has executed this so effectively that the U.S. intelligence apparatus, with all its satellites, all its signals intelligence, all its human assets, cannot locate what it needs to locate to end this war from the air. And here is the part that should genuinely alarm you. Multiple independent U.S. intelligence analyses, not one, not two, but a consistent body of reporting across multiple agencies, have all reached the same conclusion. Iran's regime is not at risk of collapse. The government retains full control over its population. The governance structures, though targeted, remain intact. The public has not risen up. There is no revolution brewing in the streets of Tehran. This is in direct, total contradiction to what President Trump stated as his goal when he launched this campaign, without a declaration of war, without congressional approval, without consulting allies. He told the Iranian people, now is your chance to take back your country. They didn't. And now look at what this war has actually cost. 8 American lives, 140 Americans wounded, somewhere between $10 and $15 billion spent. And what has been achieved? Iran's nuclear program has not been dismantled. Its regime has not collapsed. Its proxy network, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, is not only intact but has been explicitly told by the new supreme leader to fight harder. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. The drone swarms are still flying. 20 years ago, America went into Iraq with overwhelming military force. Saddam Hussein's regime fell in weeks, and then America spent the next 2 decades learning the most expensive lesson in modern history. You can win every battle and still lose the war. You cannot bomb your way to democracy. You cannot create stability from the barrel of a gun, no matter how sophisticated that gun is. Iran watched all of that. And they built their entire defense strategy around making sure the same air power that leveled Baghdad could never do to Tehran what it did to Saddam. And yet, here is perhaps the most disturbing part of all of this. The president appears to genuinely believe the war is going well, not because the intelligence says so, not because the battlefield data supports it, but because he has been reading a fringe news website, a site called Just the News, that published a poll claiming 52% of Americans support his handling of Iran. The actual polling data tells a completely different story. Only 34% of Americans support continued strikes. 52% actively disapprove of Trump's handling of the conflict. 65% of Americans say the war was never properly explained to them. 60% say the casualties are unacceptable. The public is not with him, but he doesn't know that, or he doesn't want to know it. And when the person making decisions about war and peace is operating from a version of reality that bears no resemblance to actual reality, that is not just a political problem. That is a danger to every country in this region, to every market connected to Gulf oil, to every family that pays an energy bill anywhere on Earth. Because here is the truth, stated plainly. Iran went into this conflict with one goal: survive, resist, and make the cost of this war so unbearable economically, politically, and in terms of blood that America eventually walks away. They have done exactly that in every measurable way. The regime is intact. The drones keep flying. Hormuz is closed. A new, harder leader is in charge. The proxy network is expanding. And America is out of targets. If that is what winning looks like, I would hate to see what losing does. Let me bring this all together for you. Because when you step back and look at everything we've just covered, the drone swarms, the speech, the intelligence gap, a single clear picture emerges. And it is not the picture that the headlines are painting. Iran spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. They built a drone program so cheap, so scalable, and so overwhelming that the most advanced air defense systems in the world can only stop most of it, never all of it. And all it takes is a few getting through to set a port worth billions on fire. They built a leadership structure so decentralized, so redundant, so deliberately hidden that the U.S. military, with all its satellites and intelligence networks, has run out of targets to hit, not because there is nothing left, but because Iran made itself impossible to find. And when the old supreme leader was killed, the world waited to see what came next. Would Iran blink? Would the new leader be more moderate? Would this be the moment that some kind of off-ramp appeared? Instead, Iran handed the world Mujtaba Khamenei, a man who didn't even show his face because showing his face would get him killed. A man whose first words as the most powerful figure in Iran were not about peace, not about negotiation, not about the future, but about revenge. About the 168 schoolgirls in Minab whose names he said he would never forget. About Hormuz staying closed. About every U.S. base in the Gulf being a legitimate target. About the axis of resistance, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias being told to fight harder. America went in wanting to end a regime. And here we are with a regime that is not only still standing, but is angrier, harder, and more dangerous than the one that existed before the first bomb dropped. The air war has hit its ceiling. The intelligence says the regime is not collapsing. The American public, 52% of them, disapprove of how this has been handled. And the man in charge is reading a fringe website that is telling him the opposite is true. This is not a war with a clean ending in sight. This is a war that has already spread from Iran to Lebanon, to Yemen, to Iraq, to the shipping lanes of the Red Sea. And based on everything we know about the new leadership, about the drone strategy, about the closed strait, it is a war that is about to get wider, not narrower. You clicked on this video because you wanted to understand what was actually happening. Not the version where America is winning and Iran is crumbling. Not the version where this is almost over. The real version. The one backed by intelligence assessments, battlefield data, and the supreme leader's own words. And now you have it. So if someone in your life is still watching the news and thinking, the U.S. has this under control, it's almost done, send them this video. Because the most dangerous thing in a war is not the enemy. It is the delusion that you are winning when you are not. Trump came to end the Iranian regime. Instead, he handed them a new one, younger, angrier, and with nothing left to lose.